Ahoy, fellow sea dogs and landlubbers. I am your host, Paul Baldwin. On today's third leg of our journey, we will discuss outboard motors, fishing tackle, and shrimpers and shrimp boats. So please join along. This first outboard motor is called the Liberty Single, just from 1920. And in 1922, Evan Rood introduced the twin outboard Alto. And in 1938, Evan Rood introduced the Alto Pal. It's a much lighter motor. And in 1925, motorboat competitor Johnson Motors introduced the 2 horsepower outboard motor. Please notice that these motors are not arranged in any sort of chronological order. Here's some more Evan Rood motors from the 40s, 1946, I believe, and a few others from the 20s. Do read the information that's attached if this is what interests you. Otherwise, we just move along and you can admire the mechanics of these motors for the time period. They were fairly well advanced. All gas-powered motors. Here's some advertisement from that era too. Interesting advertisement. It's a 1922 motor. And the history of the outboard motors. You may read this as well. For the antique vintage outboard motor enthusiast, you may find this fascinating. If it is something you enjoy, then please do read the cards that are attached from the different years these motors were made. This section of the museum, there is a vast resource of information for the outboard motor enthusiast. Lots of these are technical specs, other knowledge or trivia that the enthusiast will find fascinating and very interesting. So please do read the final cards here that you see posted for each one of these motors if this is what interests you. We are now approaching the fishing tackle. So Johnson rods and reels. There's an assortment of other types of reels, pan reels. These are just plain open cast reels. These are for onshore or to be used from a pier or a small boat. This is for small to medium sized game. Here you see bait buckets. Sorted bait buckets to keep your bait alive and fresh. There's the old minnow bucket, the screen, and this other minnow bucket, which is a detachable bucket. You can pull it up and inspect your live bait, be it shrimp or minnows. There's also an anchor for a boat. Here's some more supplies. And here's a list of what a typical fishing guide would charge back in the 50s and the 60s. You see here vintage 1950s tackle box with lures. Notice all the old lures. These kind of lures are already obsolete. There may be a few that are still in use. However, most of these lures have changed. Some lures nowadays are much more realistic than the older ones. Moving along, we see these offshore reels. These are for much large game. Sailfish, maybe marlins, or even shark. This device you see here with the two bowls on either side of two big metal brass bowls is called a binnacle. This was usually located on the bridge of the ship, and it contained like the compass. The purpose of the metal bowls was to prevent all the other ship's iron from interfering with the action of the compass. And what you see here are offshore lures. These lures were used to attract large game fish, sailfish, marlins, etc. We are now going to discuss commercial fishing and shrimping operations in the Gulf. First, we are going to examine the anatomy of a shrimp. Please note, and if this is something that interests you, do pause and read all the details. There's details on commercial fishing, and this lovely model of a typical shrimp boat. These are like the shrimp boats you see here in the harbor of Rockport. Very typical. This was made by a local resident. He put many hours using many photographs to recreate the model. Here's an example of a large trawler, also a fishing boat. And you shall see the level of detail here too. And these chaps, they all have their catch of shrimp. This is from days gone by. They are very proud of their shrimp catch. And this is from an oyster dredge. It was an old boot. It was typical to dredge for oysters in this parts too. And that's how they would harvest oysters in the bay. And here is another model of the typical Texas shrimp trawler. This one also has different types of lights and what each light signifies. Some light signifies it's fishing. Some lights signify they're moving along to a different place. We're going to end this third leg of our journey. I do hope you enjoyed it, and we will continue with more of this adventure. So please stay tuned.